You have gained notoriety for your skepticism about vaccines. And over the summer in an interview, you said, quote, "There's no vaccine that is, safe and effective." Do you still believe that?
I never said that.
So stop me. We have the clip. Please play the clip.
You've talked about that the media slanders you by calling you an anti-vaxxer. And you've said that you're not anti-vaccine, you're pro-safe vaccine. Difficult question. Can you name any vaccines that you think are good?
I think some of the live virus vaccines are probably averting more problems than they're causing. There's no vaccine that is, safe and effective. What I'm saying is that none of the 72 vaccines has ever been tested in a safety study pre-licensing.
So let me ask you if you think it's wise for people to take these vaccines, because you had this to say on a different podcast about whether people with young babies should be getting them shots. Watch.
For many, many years, I think parents were so gaslighted and they were scapegoated and they were vilified and marginalized, so that even parents of kids who were very, very badly injured knew what happened to their kid, but they were just reluctant to talk about it. And I think now those days are over. Our job is to resist and to talk about it to everybody. If you're walking down the street, and I do this now myself, which is, I don't want to do, I'm not a busybody. I see somebody on a hiking trail carrying a little baby, and I say to them, better not get them vaccinated. And he heard that from me. If he hears it from 10 other people, maybe he won't do it. Maybe he will save that child.
Maybe he will save that child. You think preventing vaccines for a child will save that child? Do you still say this to parents today?
What I say again is I had 3 vaccines, Casey, when I was a kid, and I was fully compliant. My kids got 72. The current recommendations are, I think, around 77. And
I have a vaccine record for my child, and there are not 77
there are 77 doses. There are 72 doses of 16 vaccines. That's just a fact.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has spent years stoking fear and mistrust of vaccines. It's only now that he's trying to position himself as a credible candidate for president that he's trying to have it both ways, to appeal to a base that is drawn to his skepticism of science, and to try and broaden that base to include people who are turned off by another Trump versus Biden matchup and might consider voting for, an independent candidate with a famous name. But here's an important thing to remember. Before becoming one of America's biggest anti-vax influencers and a spoiler presidential candidate, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was a lawyer, and lawyers know how to choose their words very carefully. In the clip we saw, a podcast host who reaches millions of listeners repeated Kennedy's lawyerly positioning, that he's not anti-vaccine, but pro-safe vaccine, and then teased Kennedy up to name any vaccines that he thinks are good. First of all, vaccines are the most effective way to prevent many infectious diseases. They undergo rigorous safety testing before being introduced. They're also constantly monitored for side effects after being introduced. Most childhood vaccines have been in use for decades, with millions of people receiving them safely every single year. But Kennedy then goes on to say there's no vaccine that is safe and effective. And tragically, Kennedy's own history provides a clear example of just how wrong he is. His role in legitimizing anti-vaccine activism hasn't been limited to the US. In 2019, he traveled to the Pacific island nation of Samoa, a trip arranged by a local anti-vax influencer. Vaccine rates in Samoa had dropped after 2 children died in 2018 from a measles vaccine that a nurse had incorrectly mixed with a muscle relaxant. This created the perfect opening for anti-vaccine misinformation and someone with a platform like RFK Jr. to assist in promoting and legitimizing those views. In the months following his visit, a measles epidemic broke out in Samoa, killing 83 people, mostly infants and children in a population of about 200,000 people. While Kennedy may not have personally told each of those families not to vaccinate their children, people who worked on the Samoan measles response said the credibility he gave to anti-vax forces had an impact that made the nation vulnerable to misinformation, which ultimately led to those 83 preventable deaths. That's blood on his hands, and the fact that he could watch what happened in Samoa and continue to peddle these dangerous claims isn't just irresponsible, it is outright criminal. And back home in the US, we're seeing the dangers of the strengthening anti-vax movement through a resurgence of measles outbreaks. The CDC has recorded more cases this year than in all of 2023. People like RFK are not only responsible for this wholly preventable phenomenon, they are actually helping exacerbate it. And of course, Kennedy tries to hedge his belief that maybe some vaccines are okay, like the 3 that he had as a kid, but points to a statistic that the 72, or was it 77, or maybe 70-something doses of 16 vaccines that we give children today have never been tested in a safety study pre-licensing. First, no matter how you count up the CDC's recommendations for immunizations for kids under 18, it is hard to come up with any number close to Kennedy's. Second, Kennedy is using the same talking point that the right adopted against COVID vaccines, that they're not anti-vaccine, they just want vaccines to be rigorously tested. Even though the COVID-19 vaccine was initially developed under the Trump administration, you may even remember folks like Ron DeSantis calling into question how safe and well tested those vaccines actually were, which created an environment of mistrust, while the numbers show that more than 13 billion doses of COVID vaccines have been safely administered globally since 2021, preventing millions of cases of severe disease and deaths. In fact, Kennedy's personal Twitter account was found in a study to be the top super spreader of vaccine misinformation, responsible for 13% of all reshares of misinformation, more than 3 times the second most retweeted account. Think about that story that he told about seeing a parent on a hiking trail carrying a baby and telling them not to vaccinate. His platform has allowed him to do that every day to millions and millions of people. The public health implications are scary enough. When the next pandemic comes our way, are people going to listen to doctors and experts, or RFK Jr. and Donald Trump? Then there are the political implications. Kennedy is now officially running as an independent, but his campaign has a lot of MAGA DNA. One conservative mega donor has been the largest donor to both Kennedy's super PAC and one of Donald Trump's biggest super PACs. But that's not only because Kennedy has aligned himself with far-right figures who've worked to subvert American democracy, it is because polls show that RFK on the ballot takes more support away from Biden than from Trump. So pro-Trump forces are more than happy to give him a boost. And so even though that's the same Biden-Trump matchup that we saw in 2020, this election is shaping up to be a lot more like 2016, when third-party candidates played a big role in determining the outcome. In critical states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, the margin that Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump to was smaller than the number of votes that went to third-party candidates like Jill Stein or Gary Johnson. Republican donors funding Kennedy's campaign are hoping that he becomes this year's version of them. The simple truth is that this election could come down to just a few thousand votes in a few key states. So if you're concerned about the health of our citizens or the health of our democracy, you should be concerned not only by what RFK Jr. has to say, but especially by who's listening to him. Before you go, I need some help. Please subscribe to the channel and do your part to help grow the progressive media ecosystem. I don't do sponsorships or paid ads, I won't ask for money, but just subscribing to this channel goes a really long way, and it helps get the message out to more people. The subscribe button is right here on this screen. You can also subscribe to my Spanish language channel, which I made to reach those crucial Spanish-speaking voters. That link is on the screen too. And finally, if you want to listen to my audio podcast, you can follow that link as well. Thanks so much for watching.